Chinese President Xi Jinping nears the end of a 6-day trip to France, Serbia and Hungary. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. Chinese President Xi Jinping traveled to France, Serbia and Hungary this week. The visits were intended to inject momentum towards the further development of China-Europe relations. Economic, trade and cultural cooperation were high on the agenda as the Chinese president met with leaders to chart a mutually beneficial path forward. There is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Nikola Mikovic is a freelance journalist and analyst. Victor Gao is a chair professor at Soochow University. Also with us is Joav Toker. He is an associate professor at the American Graduate School in Paris. And Song Xin is the founder of Sinnvoll think tank and a former policy advisor to the European Parliament. Thanks to everyone for being with us. Song Xin, this is a key and significant visit by President Xi Jinping to Europe, which will reinforce the development of relations between China and Europe. How do you see it? What are the main takeaways?
Well, I think there are 3 points I need to share with everybody. First one, I think this is really a restarting point for EU and China actually to rebuild a little bit the trust that has been lost during the past 5 years. And especially right now, there's a popular narrative in Europe saying like we should de-risk with China and at different levels. So I think this is a good restarting point. And second thing is, right now, I think the gravity of EU-China relationship is somehow shifting from Western Europe towards Central Eastern Europe. I don't mean that Western Europe doesn't have an important role anymore, but just actually China has a more balanced approach towards China more than before. And third point is, I think right now, the synergy between CEE and China actually is growing compared with the Western European countries such as Germany and France.
Right, Nikola Mikovic, you wrote a recent column, and in that column you said, and I'm quoting you here, you said, "For years, China has become one of the most important trading partners of the European Union. In 2023, China was the largest partner for EU imports of goods." And then you went on to say, China is also involved in the construction of numerous infrastructure projects all over the continent. Elaborate on that for us.
China is definitely involved in various projects in Europe, and I agree with the previous guest that now the gravity is moving towards the Eastern Europe and Central Europe. Especially here in the Balkans, China is involved in the construction of strategically important Belgrade-Budapest railway, which is part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, and it should connect not only Belgrade and Budapest, but also Hungary with Greece through Serbia and North Macedonia. China is also involved in other infrastructure projects here in Serbia and also in other countries in the Balkans. But in the West, there are certain factions that apparently want to limit cooperation between the European Union and China, which is why the focus is now moving to the Balkans and to other regions that have more, let's say, freedom to develop relations with Beijing.
So, Nikola, you say there are some factions in the West which want to limit the kind of cooperation we're seeing between China and Central and Eastern Europe, but it's actually going in the opposite direction, isn't it? These relationships are improving and strengthening all the time.
In certain countries, yes, including Serbia and Hungary, because both countries continue increasing their economic cooperation with Beijing. And the fact that Serbia signed 28 agreements with Beijing clearly suggests that what you said, it's going in the opposite direction. Although I don't think that they want to completely, those factions in the West, I don't think they want to completely cut off China from this region. It just wants to limit cooperation. They might succeed in some countries in the Baltics, for instance, but definitely not in this part of Europe and the Balkans, and also not in Hungary, as we see.
Right. Victor Gao, Hungary is the last stop on President Xi's trip. This year actually marks the 75th anniversary of the establishment of China China-Hungary diplomatic relations. In 2017, the bilateral relationship was actually elevated to a comprehensive strategic partnership. Hungary is also the biggest recipient of Chinese investment in Central and Eastern Europe. So give us a sense of how significant this visit is for President Xi and the relationships that he is reinforcing right now.
Thank you very much for having me. As President Xi Jinping's visit to Hungary indicated, China-Hungarian political relations cannot be better because the two countries really share many views on major international relations, and China admired the independence of the mind in Hungary's independence, for example, and its own courage in taking major positions on international issues. Economically speaking, China-Hungarian relations are truly for their mutual benefit. China is as big as Hungary relative to China is as small, but the two countries treat each other as equals and fully respect each other. China's investment in EV and in battery technologies in Hungary really is very significant because this may enable Hungary eventually to become a leading manufacturer of EVs for not only Hungary itself, but for the European Union at large. And such willingness on the Chinese side to transfer top-notch technologies to Hungary to enable it to really accelerate its EV industry, especially in Europe, where the EV industry is really just starting, this all bodes well for the true benefit of China-Hungarian close cooperation and friendship to each other. Suffice it to say that China views all the European countries as equal, big or small, and Hungary is a typical example that once we respect each other, treat each other as equal, China can really generate miracles and economic benefits for the people in that particular country.
Right, and Victor, when we talk about this comprehensive strategic partnership, would it be fair then to say that it is a partnership that is driven primarily by the economic and trade relationship, as well as you've just pointed out, technology?
I would say China-Hungarian relations are very much important for several reasons. One is, politically speaking, China and Hungary respect each other. China highly admire Hungary for sticking to the one China policy, for example. And then in terms of economic and trade, definitely China can lend its vast resources in not only industrialization, manufacturing, but also in high tech to Hungary to enable it to accelerate and in some cases to start from scratch. EV industry is just one example. China is leading the world in EV revolution, and China believes that eventually EV cars will need to replace the traditional fuel cars. Now, not all countries have that courage and vision to embrace EV industry as the Hungarian government is embracing, and China and Hungary can really become good partners in enabling Hungary to start from almost scratch and to set up major manufacturing capabilities, not only for the EV cars themselves, but very importantly for the battery technology. This will enable, in my belief, Hungary to fast become one of the leading manufacturers of EV cars in Europe as a whole. And this will really generate a benefit to the Hungarian people in terms of jobs created, as well as the advanced technologies to be brought to Hungary for their next phase of economic development. Again, this really positions Hungary well in the next round of the EV revolution.
Joav, Toker, as I said, this was a visit by the Chinese president, which began in France. He then went on to Serbia and to Hungary. How do you think it impacts broader China-EU relations?
It's true that, as you mentioned, putting the previous questions to my colleagues on the panel, that it seems that the center is technology and commerce and development and mutual help. Through West European eyes, the perspective is also this one, obviously, although there are more difficult points, let us say, regarding what the West Europeans believe is an unbalanced overall trade relationship with China as the a commercial balance is in favor of China chronically for many years. I think it exceeds for France alone almost $50 billion annually. But what is important to put into the context through West European, but through EU and European framework as a whole, is the political dimension, which is beyond and within the commercial traditional criteria. And the political dimension in Europe right now, it may be difficult to perceive from the United States or from China. But here in Europe, the political focus is on the war in Ukraine. For the time being, when you speak about the large European perspective, the first priority is the strategic situation. Technology, commerce, trade come afterwards.
Song Shin, President Xi and the Serbian President Vučić, they signed a joint statement on building the China-Serbia relationship, building that community and looking at a shared future. Serbia said it's willing to work with China to implement the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, as well as the Global Civilization Initiative. So break that down for us and how it will improve the relationship between these two countries.
Well, I think actually China sees Serbia not only as a partner for the Balkan region, but also a good partner for the future China-European relationship as a whole. So I think this will actually lay the foundation for the further development of the three-pillared relationship, which has the central pillar is about economic cooperation, and the second pillar is about political cooperation, and the third pillar is about people-to-people exchange. Because right now, you have to admit that during the past 5 years, there haven't been quite a lot of social exchanges between the two sides, no matter with Serbian or European in general. So I think that should increase. That side should be increased in order to increase this kind of mutual understanding for further this connectivity plan or this type of economic cooperation.
Nikola Mikovic, President Xi said that the bilateral relationship between China and Serbia serves as a model for friendly relations between China and the European Union. In fact, Serbia is China's first free trade partner in Central and Eastern Europe. Here is the Chinese ambassador to Serbia, Li Ming. Let's listen to him.
8 years ago, President Xi Jinping paid the first state visit to the Republic of Serbia, and that visit has created fruitful outcomes. China and Serbia relations has developed exponentially in the past 8 years. For example, in the year of 2016, our bilateral trade volume was less than $600 million. But 8 years later, in the year of 2023, China-Serbia bilateral trade volume has reached more than $6 billion.
So, Nikola, when we hear the Chinese president talk about this relationship being a model for other relationships with European countries, and when we hear the ambassador there talk about the huge expansion in trade between the two countries, I mean, how significant is it? What does it mean for the two countries?
Serbia is definitely a model, and it's actually much more than that. Julian Assange once said that Serbia is one of those countries where the future happens first. It is therefore no surprise that China and Serbia signed an agreement to build a shared future. And Serbia is the first European country to purchase the Chinese-made trains. It is the first European country to purchase Chinese-made air defense systems. It was the first European country that purchased and started using Chinese-made Sinopharm vaccines during the COVID pandemic. It is the first country in Central and Eastern Europe that completely abolished the visa regime for Chinese travelers. So Serbia is a very important partner for Beijing, and it can serve as a model for other countries in Europe, although it is still quite uncertain if certain factions, especially in the United States, will pressure European countries to limit their cooperation with Beijing. Serbia at this point serves as a good model for many countries.
Victor, you were telling us a moment ago about the investments that China is making in Hungary, for instance, in the development of the EV industry, the electric vehicle industry. But what about things like the steel industry as well as the energy industry? I mean, we know that China has taken the lead internationally in the development of green technology, for instance.
Yes, indeed. I think China-Hungarian economic cooperation is not limited just to the EV industry. China has made huge investments in many other sectors, including connectivity, infrastructure projects, and other traditional industrialized manufacturing capabilities. And also, the two countries, like China and Serbia, fully respect each other politically, stick to the one China policy, and to the extent possible, they also consult each other and sometimes coordinate with each other on major points in the international relations. And the previous panelist talked about the Ukraine war. I would say between China and EU, there is no major point of difference because China fully respects Ukraine as a member of the United Nations, and China wants to have the United Nations Charter fully applicable to Ukraine. And China has never acknowledged the change of status for Crimea or the eastern four provinces of Ukraine. And from the day one of the war in Ukraine, China has insisted that ceasefire should happen as quickly as possible. So, philosophically speaking, I think history may prove China to be on the right side of history for not aiding any side to the war, but demanding and promoting ceasefire and ending the hostility as soon as possible to avoid any additional loss of the Ukrainian people. I hope EU as a whole and many European countries eventually will see that China is promoting the real peace for the Ukrainian war. And eventually, if we can bring the two warring parties to the table of negotiation, it will contribute to creating lasting peace for Europe as a whole. And we believe this is the right path going forward, rather than agitating for the longer and continuation of the war in Ukraine.
Joav Toker, in an interview with CGTN, the former Hungarian Prime Minister Peter Medgyessy, he praised Chinese investment in his country and says that it is mutually beneficial. He said that these are the kinds of investments that create jobs, they create investment, they create opportunity, and they spur development in the country. You know, China's always adopted a policy or a doctrine or a philosophy that its investments must be mutually beneficial. We've often heard it being referred to as a win-win strategy. And this does fit in with that strategy, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you present it, you know, in a completely theoretical level, of course, the win-win formula is a winning win, is a winning formula. And we actually see all around the world, not only in Europe, we have plenty of examples in Asia, in Africa, with bilateral relations of China with specific countries, which are built on the same principle and which indeed benefit to both parties. There are other countries in which there are some doubts or some afterthoughts, but time will show us.
Songshin, Hungary, Budapest will assume the rotating EU presidency that takes place in July. And, you know, Hungary is seen as one of the countries that, one of the EU members, I should say, that has a close relationship with China. Now, in an article in a Hungarian newspaper, President Xi said the two countries' relations were on a golden voyage, as he put it, and they shared similar positions on international and regional affairs. The Chinese leader praised Hungary's independent policy towards China. The two countries, President Xi said, should lead regional cooperation and face global challenges together. So what are your thoughts on how this relationship could evolve once Hungary takes over the presidency of the EU in July?
Well, I think this year is very special in that sense because Hungary is going to be the president of the EU for the second half of the year. But also, like during the second half of the year, we're going to have new elections at the EU level. So there is going to be a new commission. And this is really a good strategic actually opportunity for the bilateral relationship, because it means maybe under the leadership of Hungary, we can renegotiate some very important issues, such as, for example, the punitive tariff on Chinese imported EV, for example, or how actually the EU can react in the future in a more, I would like to say, coherent way towards Chinese imports or this bilateral commercial relationship. I think for Sino-Hungarian actually relationship, it's not only built on this economic interest. It also built on with this the hope that actually the Chinese investment can really help the Hungary to build local capacity. Because if we look back at the investment history in Hungary, I mean, German has been or have been always the biggest investors in Hungary during the past 40 years. But unfortunately, despite all that, the local capacity hasn't been really built like successfully. So I think that is what Hungary really looks forward from the Chinese investors. They hope to have more, research institutes, to have more like local educated engineers and Hungarians in order to actually to generate some local companies, local brands, not only like right now, because right now the Chinese actually manufacturers, they really provide their, the lithium battery to actually the German brands who also invested in Hungary. But there's no local actually brands or company who are fully involved in this process.
Nikola, I was talking a moment ago about that free trade agreement that was signed between China and Serbia. That agreement was signed in October of last year. And if we look at some of the details of it, by the way, it actually takes effect on July 1st. But if we look at the details, China says it's ready to import more agricultural products from Serbia and boost its exports, including green technology and communications equipment as well. And Serbia's products will enter the Chinese market at very competitive prices as well. So overall, how much of a boost will this be for Serbia's economy?
The problem with Serbia's economy is that, at least at this point, it has very little to offer to China. That can change in the future, though, especially if China invests more in the Serbian economy, not only China, but other actors as well. The fact that China signed the free trade agreement with Serbia shows that European companies can use that to open some factories here in Serbia and then to try to export certain goods to China. But again, it will take time to make various deals with those companies and to try to implement that in reality. For now, Serbia will be focused on infrastructure projects. That's my take, and it will focus on the Expo exhibition that should take place in 2027, and it expects China to play a big role in that process. And also Serbia is interested in the Belt and Road Initiative, especially in terms of the Belgrade-Budapest railway, and China is also involved in the construction that should begin actually in this year or next year, and it should connect the city of Belgrade with the southern Serbian city of Niš, which is also very important because it also connects Serbia with North Macedonia and Greece. But again, the free trade agreement is also very important. At this point, it's more important for China than for Serbia, but that can change in the future if Belgrade finds a way to increase its production and to offer more goods to China.
Victor, while China is very often focused on trade and economic relations in its relationships with other countries, I mean, it also pays a lot of attention to cultural exchanges, people-to-people exchanges. And if we look at this current visit, I mean, we heard that there will be direct flights between Belgrade and Shanghai, and that's expected to start towards the end of this year. And there are also hopes that there'll be more direct flights between Belgrade and Guangzhou in China as well. So what is that going to do to promote the kind of people-to-people exchanges that China wants to see?
You know for sure that China by now is already the largest trading nation with more than 130 countries in the world. And I think China's exporting and importing capabilities are increasing as we speak. On the other hand, China really promotes people-to-people exchanges of all kinds, and China has been the largest source of international tourism for quite a few years. And after the pandemic, this trend picks up again, and I hope more people from China will really take advantage of this visa exemption status that Serbia offered to the Chinese travelers, so that more of them will visit Serbia, and more Chinese students will want to be educated in Serbia, learning their language, and try to understand Serbia in the overall European context. This will lay the good foundation for the future exchanges for many generations to come. And I do hope Serbia will have more products to sell to China, not only agricultural products, but also otherwise, especially when mutual investments in each other's countries will lay the better foundation for more products to be made in Serbia, which can be sold either back to China or to other European countries.
Song Shin, looking very broadly at this trip, 3 countries that the Chinese president visited, how would you characterize it? I mean, did it exceed expectations in many respects?
Well, I think so, because, for example, take the example of a French visit. I think this is significant because it is the first time, actually, since 5 years that Chinese and European leaders have this kind of joint statement on regional conflicts. And this means actually the gap between the Chinese and European perspective are being narrowed down somehow. This time is only on the conflict in Israel, between Israel and Palestine. But I think in the near future there might be some further steps towards a joint maybe statement on the Ukrainian and the Russian conflicts. So I think that is significant. But also for the other side, for the visit to Hungary and Serbia, I think that shows actually China wants to dig more into this complementarity between the EU and China, because right now there is a very popular narrative in Europe saying like China is much less a partner as before, more a competitor and even a rival, which means actually the partnership or the complementarity is decreasing actually largely, which can be false, because actually the only reason for that is because between German and Chinese industry, between French and Chinese industry, the cooperation actually scope has been decreased. But actually for the Sino-Hungarian cooperation, the complementarity has increased.
Right.
So I think if we look at EU as a whole, maybe this is a balanced situation.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. And that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.